I still remember the exact sound my suitcase wheels made when they rolled across the front porch of my husband's family home that Thanksgiving afternoon. I had driven for hours humming along to Christmas songs on the radio, my car packed with groceries, gifts, and the stubborn hope that this holiday would finally feel like family. The house, a stately colonial, with wide windows and a wraparound porch, should have been glowing with warmth, laughter, and the smell of roasted turkey by then. Instead, the silence hit me first, thick, cold, unsettling. Not even the television was on. I tried to brush it off at first. Maybe they were upstairs, maybe in the backyard. But when I pushed open the front door, the air inside was bitterly still, the kind of stillness that presses against your chest. There were no cheerful greetings, no sense of pumpkin pie or sage stuffing, just the faint creak of a rocking chair. And there, in the middle of the living room, sat Victor, my husband Brady's stepfather. His pale hands rested on the cane beside him, but his eyes sharp and too knowing for the role of decrepit old man Brady always described, flicked toward me with unsettling clarity. "Gone on a cruise with my ex," the note in my hand read. My eyes blurred as I tried to steady the trembling paper. "You'll stay home and take care of stepdad. He needs you. Back Monday. Brady." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. A hollow pit opened inside my chest as the words sank in. He wasn't here. Not just him, none of them. My husband, his mother, even his sister. They had all left me behind with Victor like I was some afterthought, a disposable caretaker. The silence broke when Victor's voice rasped behind me. "He's not coming back until Monday, is he?" I turned sharply, clutching the note like a lifeline. "No," I whispered. "No one is." Victor's expression barely shifted, but I caught it, a faint shadow of grim satisfaction. "Left you with the dirty work, didn't they?" Classic Brady move. I wanted to protest, to defend my husband, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I sank into the nearest kitchen chair, numb. We had been planning Thanksgiving dinner for months. I had taken time off work, spent hours choosing recipes, even bought gifts. And Brady had been planning something else entirely. I reached for my phone, my heart clinging to one last shred of denial. Straight to voicemail. Again. I had already called 3 times on the drive over. My chest tightened. And then my phone pinged. My pulse surged. Maybe it was Brady. But when I unlocked the screen, it wasn't a message. It was Instagram. The photo burned into me before I could look away. Brady standing on the deck of a cruise ship, his arm wrapped around Hannah, the colleague he'd been mentoring, the one with the too bright laugh I had once pretended not to notice. They were smiling, champagne flutes in hand, toasting the camera. The caption read, "Hat New Beginnings Caribbean Getaway with @Brady Mitchell and family." Family. The word stabbed like a knife. I felt Victor's gaze on me as my hands shook. I turned the screen toward him, my voice cracking. "They're on a cruise with Hannah." Victor's blue eyes darkened. "She's been calling the house for months. Pretty voice, terrible laugh." I knew something was brewing. The room tilted. I stumbled to the counter for support, forcing myself to breathe. That wasn't just betrayal. It was abandonment. Calculated, deliberate abandonment. Something inside me snapped when I opened our banking app. The numbers glared back at me, cold and merciless. 3 days ago, a withdrawal of $500 and $200. Almost all our savings. Money we had set aside for a house, for a future Brady had promised. My father's legacy, the money he left me when he died, was gone. Spent on cocktails and sunsets with another woman. He took everything I whispered, the weight of it pressing into my bones. Victor nodded slowly, as though he had been waiting for me to catch up to a truth he already knew. "They've been doing the same to me for years. Draining accounts, skimping on my care, buying themselves purses and vacations. All while telling the neighbors I was too expensive to look after." I stared at him, horror and recognition colliding. We weren't just two people left behind. We were victims of the same betrayal, discarded by the same family. My phone buzzed again. My best friend Leah calling to wish me a happy Thanksgiving. I silenced it, ashamed. How could I tell her my husband was on a cruise with another woman while I stood in an empty kitchen beside his dying stepfather? The air smelled faintly of old takeout and dust. I looked at the sink full of dirty dishes, the empty fridge, the barren counters. They hadn't even stocked food for Victor before leaving. The humiliation and rage rose hot in my chest until I couldn't stand still anymore. "No," I said firmly, startling myself with the steel in my voice. "We deserve better than this." Victor tilted his head, studying me with that sharp, unsettling awareness. I grabbed my coat and purse. "I'm going to the store. We're having a proper Thanksgiving meal." Something flickered across his face, then surprise, then approval. "Haven't had a home-cooked meal in months," he admitted. As I drove to the grocery store, my hands tight on the steering wheel, my thoughts spiraled. How long had Brady been planning this? How long had I been blind? And how had I become so small in a marriage that now suddenly seemed like it had been built on shadows and lies from the start? I chose a turkey braised potatoes, vegetables, moving mechanically through the aisles. It wasn't about the food anymore. It was about reclaiming something, however small, in the face of the humiliation that threatened to crush me. When I returned, the kitchen counters were cleared. Victor sat waiting at the table, a stack of papers before him. He pushed a folder toward me. "Evidence," he said simply. "Bank statements, medical records, notes scribbled in shaky but meticulous handwriting. Neglect, documented theft recorded." I stared at the folder, my stomach churning. "Why are you showing me this?" Victor leaned forward, his voice steady. "Because you've been wronged too, and I don't have much time left." He tapped the medical report on top. "Terminal, 3 months at most." My throat tightened. I wanted to say I was sorry, but he cut me off. "Don't be sorry. Be smart. They think they left you with a burden, but really they left you with an opportunity." He slid an envelope across the table. "My real will and trust, not the one Brady and his mother know about. If you help me, they get nothing. You and I, we get justice." The room went silent except for the ticking of the kitchen clock. My hand hovered over the envelope. His words burned through me, echoing against the raw wound of betrayal in my chest. Justice. A word that suddenly felt heavier, more dangerous, and more necessary than any I had ever spoken. I met his gaze. "Yes," I said, my voice steady now. "Let's begin." Victor's eyes lingered on me, as though measuring the weight of my resolve. For a moment, the frail old man facade slipped, and I saw the steel beneath the banker who once built empires of numbers, the husband who had endured decades with Elaine, the stepfather who had quietly watched Brady rot into his mother's likeness. He leaned back in his chair, a thin smile curling across his lips. "I knew you had more fire in you than they gave you credit for," he said. He led me down the hall to a small bedroom converted into a sick room. A hospital bed sat unused in the corner, gathering dust, while a plain twin bed showed the impressions of restless nights. From a desk drawer, he withdrew a thick folder stamped medical. He placed it in my hands without ceremony. "Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. Diagnosed 3 months ago." The words blurred as I skimmed the reports. Scan after scan, doctor's notes, recommendations for treatments Elaine had dismissed. My stomach turned. They knew, I whispered. "Oh, yes." Elaine was there when the doctor told me. 2 days later, she complained she needed a break from caregiving. Brady agreed. Said a cruise would cheer her up. His laugh was dry, humorless. 66 years old, claiming exhaustion while I was the one dying. The cruelty of it crashed over me like a wave. Not just betrayal, deliberate abandonment, and not just of me, of him. I checked the medication bottles in the bathroom cabinet. My hands shook as I compared them against the prescription sheets. Half doses, missed refills, enzymes watered down until they were nearly useless. "This isn't neglect," I whispered. "This is abuse." Victor's voice was steady. "It's what happens when people see you as a burden, not a person." He handed me a worn notebook from beneath his pillow. Inside, page after page, catalogued dates, doses skipped, funds siphoned. He had documented everything. Despite the failing body, his mind remained sharp, relentless, unyielding. I made us dinner that night from the meager groceries I had bought: roasted turkey breast, mashed potatoes, green beans. Not a feast, but enough to fill the cold kitchen with warmth. As we ate, he studied me with those perceptive blue eyes. "Tell me about your marriage," he said suddenly. I froze, my fork hovering midair. "What do you mean? When did you first notice Brady wasn't the man you thought he was?" The question pierced straight through me. I set my fork down, staring at the congealing gravy. "It was gradual," I admitted. At first, he was attentive, supportive. He encouraged my graphic design work, said he admired my independence. But after we married, little things changed. He suggested I work from home to save money on rent. Then my equipment kept failing my computer, my software. He said it wasn't worth fixing right away. Victor nodded knowingly. Isolation tactic. My throat tightened. He started questioning which clients I should take, saying some weren't worth my time. He'd check my phone for numbers, make comments about me being out too late with friends. Always small, almost reasonable things. But together, they built a cage around me. I swallowed hard, my chest aching. When my father died last year, I inherited $30,000. Brady insisted we put it in our joint account for our future for a down payment on a house. That money, it's gone now. He spent it on Hannah, on a cruise. Victor's gaze softened with quiet fury. He did the same to me. Different methods, same theft. Elaine called it living the life we deserved. Designer purses, spa weekends, vacations, all while the heat was turned down, my medications cut in half. We finished the meal in silence, the air between us charged with shared betrayal. Later, he beckoned me to his study, a room Elaine had tried to erase with lavender candles and meditation cushions. He pointed to a bland landscape painting on the wall. Help me with that. Behind the painting, hidden by a loose panel, was a waterproof document case. Inside, deeds account, ledgers, investment statements. My breath caught. This is my real assets, he said. Over $3 million. Property offshore accounts holdings Elaine knows nothing about. They've been siphoning from what they could see. But this? He tapped the papers. This is mine. And now it's ours to protect. The scale of it staggered me. I thought I had married into security, into a family with roots. But I had been living beside rot, while the real strength of this family sat quietly in the shadows, documenting every crime. The next morning, Victor's attorney arrived. Patricia Winters, a tall, silver-haired woman with sharp green eyes and a no-nonsense tone. She studied me for a long moment before speaking. So you're the abandoned daughter-in-law. I flushed, but Victor spoke before I could. She's more than that. She's my ally. Patricia nodded. Good. We'll need one. She laid out stacks of legal documents on the dining room table. Amendments to his will. Transfers to new trusts. Medical powers of attorney. Every line designed to ensure Elaine and Brady couldn't touch what wasn't rightfully theirs. I offered to organize the evidence scanning and cataloging Victor's meticulous notes, arranging them into folders and digital files. For the first time in weeks, my skills felt useful again. Patricia's approval was cool but genuine. Perfect. We'll need this airtight. They'll contest everything. That night, after Patricia left, Victor pulled a dusty photo album from the shelf. Look, he said, pointing to Brady as a teenager, Elaine's hand resting on his shoulder, her face bent close as if whispering into his ear. On the next page, Brady's biological father stood stiffly, his smile brittle. Elaine did to him what Brady's doing to you, Victor said. The patterns leapt out at me. Financial manipulation, emotional control, the same cycles of charm and cruelty. My heart clenched. It's like seeing my own life written in photographs. Victor's tired hand closed the album. That's why we have to stop them now. Not just for me, for you, for whoever comes after. I reached across the table and took his hand. His skin was paper thin, but the grip was strong, steady. Then we'll do it, I said. Together. We sat in silence, the weight of our pact binding us tighter than blood. For the first time in days, I felt not just anger, not just grief, but purpose. The next morning dawned gray, the November sky pressing low against the house like a weight. I brewed tea in the quiet kitchen, the kettle's whistle sharp in the stillness, while Victor sat at the table with a blanket draped over his shoulders. His eyes followed me as I poured his cup, steady and calculating despite the tremor in his hands. We need to establish the narrative, he said matter-of-factly, his voice stronger than I expected. If Brady and Elaine believe I'm declining faster than I am, they'll make mistakes. They'll show their true priorities. The words unsettled me, not because I disagreed, but because of how calmly he said them, like a man planning a business deal, not his own death. I nodded slowly. What do you have in mind? Victor leaned back in his chair, his thin fingers steepled together. Patricia's brother runs a medical supply company. He owes me a favor. He can help us stage what needs to be staged. By noon, an unmarked van pulled discreetly into the driveway. A man named James stepped out brisk and professional, his arms laden with equipment. Oxygen tanks, monitors with detachable leads, empty medication vials with realistic pharmacy labels. Medical theater, he called it with a grim smile. Together, we transformed Victor's bedroom into a convincing tableau of decline. The oxygen tank stood prominently by the bed. Monitoring devices blinked with faint lights. Hospital-grade sheets made the twin bed look like something out of an intensive care unit. I snapped photos from carefully chosen angles, Victor lying pale beneath the sheets. His glasses removed his thin hair mussed to accentuate the hollows of his face. Shadows. Victor coached his banker's precision, spilling into even this performance. Light from above. Makes me look closer to the grave. I applied the faintest touch of makeup, darkening the circles beneath his eyes. The effect was chilling. The man who had met me with sharp blue eyes and a cutting wit just days ago now looked like death had already settled in his bones. When it was my turn, Victor insisted I appear in the photos too. "You need to look exhausted," he said. "Overwhelmed. The caretaker they abandoned." So I let my hair fall into disarray, wiped off my makeup, pulled on an oversized sweater that hung from my shoulders. In the photos, I looked smaller, fragile, my eyes rimmed with weariness as I hovered beside his bed, arranging bottles, clutching his hand. It was disturbingly easy to slip into that role. Maybe because it wasn't all acting. When the photos were ready, I crafted the first message. Not to Brady, he wouldn't answer, but to his sister Melissa, the only one who had bothered to check in since they left. "Victor had a rough night. Fever spiked to 102. I'm doing my best with his pain meds. We'll keep you posted," she replied within minutes. "Oh no, poor Uncle Victor, keep me updated." Victor leaned back against his pillows, his smile thin and satisfied. Hook set. The hours bled into one another as we tightened the snare. I called Brady's voicemail, recording messages of carefully measured panic. "His breathing is worse. The hospice nurse is concerned. Please, Brady, call me back. I really need your support." Each word was calculated, documented, layered into the narrative of abandonment. And then came the unexpected knock at the door. When I opened it, a woman in her 70s stood holding a casserole dish covered in foil. "I'm Edith Peterson from next door," she announced, peering past me. "Thought you might need some dinner. Looking after Victor is no small job." I invited her in, grateful for both the food and her timing. Over steaming mugs of tea, she leaned in and lowered her voice. "I've been watching that family for years. The way they treat him, it's shameful. Your husband is no better than his mother, if you don't mind my saying so." "I don't mind at all," I said softly, letting the raw edge of my anger show. "They left me a note. Just a note. Told me to take care of him while they went on a cruise." Her lips pressed into a tight line. "Shameful," she repeated. "Absolutely shameful. Last month, Victor fell in the yard. It was my Harold who helped him up. Brady sat inside watching football, wouldn't even answer the door." I wrote down every word after she left, documenting the date and her statement. Over the next 2 days, 5 more neighbors stopped by, each with their own stories, their own small observations of neglect. Each became another thread in the net we were weaving. On Saturday morning, Patricia returned with a briefcase full of final documents. She drove us to the local bank where Victor had been a customer for 30 years. The manager, Mr. Collins, greeted him warmly. "Victor, good to see you out and about. How are you feeling?" Victor's voice was deliberately weak. "Getting my affairs in order, Richard. Memory's still sharp even if the body's failing." In the privacy of the manager's office, Victor signed papers transferring his hidden assets into new trusts. Trusts that placed me as trustee and earmarked millions for elder care charities. Mr. Collins bore witness, his sympathy etched into his features. As we left, he mentioned casually, "Your stepson was in last week asking about your accounts." I reminded him he doesn't have authorization. Victor gave a thin, humorless smile. "Always planning ahead, that boy." That evening, as we sat reviewing documents at the kitchen table, Victor's phone buzzed with a video call from Melissa. We exchanged a glance. This was the moment. I mussed my hair, pinched my cheeks, and positioned the camera so I looked drawn and exhausted. When I answered, Melissa gasped. "Jade, you look terrible. Is everything okay?" "Managing," I said simply before turning the camera to Victor. He lay back in bed, oxygen tubing at his nose, his voice weak and trembling. "Melissa? Sweetheart?" Her eyes filled with concern. "Uncle Victor, should we come home early? Will he make it until Monday?" The disgust rose in my throat, but I forced myself to nod understandingly. "It's hard to say. The hospice nurse isn't optimistic. If you want to say goodbye." Melissa chewed her lip. "I'll talk to Brady. The thing is, the tickets were non-refundable and Mom's been so stressed lately." When the call ended, Victor removed the oxygen cannula and looked at me. "Did you record that?" I held up my phone, every word. For the first time, his mask slipped. The satisfaction in his eyes was tempered by sorrow. My family weighing cruise tickets against saying goodbye. I knew it would happen exactly like this. I sat on the edge of his bed, my throat tight. "I'm sorry, Victor." "Don't be." He squeezed my hand, his skin thin and papery, but his grip firm. "Their true colors needed to be revealed, and thanks to you, they will be." The room fell quiet, then filled only with the ticking clock and the faint hum of the heater. For the first time, I realized just how much Victor had come to mean to me, not just as an ally in revenge, but as a man who had shown me more honesty in 4 days than my husband had in 6 years. Sunday morning arrived with a stillness that felt different from the others. When I brought Victor his tea, I noticed the faint bluish tint around his lips, the tremor in his hands more pronounced than the day before. He tried to smile, but it was thinner, weaker. "You don't have to pretend for me," I whispered, helping him sit upright. "You're not feeling well, are you?" His chuckle was soft, brittle. "Ironic, isn't it, after all the staging and performance, the real thing sneaks up on us." I called Diane, the hospice nurse, who had been visiting once a week before the family left. She promised to stop by that afternoon, but her voice carried a quiet warning it wouldn't be long now. Hours, maybe a day. Something in me shifted then. The plan, the evidence, the trap, it all receded for a moment. What mattered was him, his comfort, his dignity. "What would you like for breakfast?" I asked gently, desperate to give him something he wanted. He closed his eyes for a moment, his voice faint. "Peaches, fresh peaches with cream. My Martha made them every Sunday." It was November, but I drove to 3 different stores until I found peaches worth slicing. When I placed the crescents into a bowl topped with whipped cream, his eyes misted over. "Just like she used to make," he whispered, his voice catching. "No one's bothered to remember such things about me in years." I sat beside him as he ate slowly, cherishing each bite. In that moment, revenge seemed almost small compared to the simple power of kindness. Later that afternoon, Diane arrived. She examined him quietly, then led me into the hall. "His organs are shutting down. It's happening faster than we thought. You should prepare yourself." The words punched through me even though I'd known this was coming. "Should I call the family?" I asked, my throat tight. Diane shook her head. "At this point, it's about his comfort, not theirs. If they wanted to be here, they would have." Victor, who had clearly overheard, spoke with more strength than I thought he had left. "Don't call them," he said firmly. "They made their choice. But there's still one more thing we need to finish." I dialed Patricia. Her calm voice carried urgency when I explained. Within an hour, she arrived, a notary named Thomas at her side. Victor rallied, summoning the last of his strength to sit upright in bed, his hair combed back, his eyes bright with determination. "Are you sure you're up for this?" Patricia asked, concern in her voice. "More certain than I've ever been," Victor replied, his tone almost regal. "Death has a way of clarifying priorities." Paperwork spread across his bedside table. He signed each page with a hand that shook but never faltered. The will, the trust documents, the transfers to charities that would help elders like him stripped of dignity by the people closest to them. And finally, the clause naming me, the abandoned wife, as trustee and beneficiary. When the last signature dried, Victor's breath seemed to ease. "Now for the letter," he murmured. Patricia set up her tablet to record as he dictated. What came out of him wasn't rage. It wasn't even condemnation. It was something heavier, disappointment, wounds too deep to scream anymore. "To my family," he began, his voice gathering strength. "By the time you read this, I will be gone. Not that my presence or absence seemed to matter much to you in recent years." He recited the facts with calm precision. Holidays spent alone while they vacationed. Medical appointments canceled for convenience, Comments overheard about waiting for the old man to die. I don't write this from anger, he said, his eyes shining with unshed tears. I write this from the clarity of the end. The greatest pain in life is not illness, nor even death. It is realizing that those you loved saw you only as an obligation, a burden to be tolerated, rather than a person to be cherished. By the time he finished, even the notary was discreetly wiping his eyes. Patricia pressed his hand with rare gentleness. We'll make sure they hear every word. After they left, Victor wasn't finished. They'll question my state of mind, he said. We need video. I set up his old camera. The lens blinked red as he looked straight into it, his voice steady despite the shadows under his eyes. For 20 minutes he detailed his neglect, his decisions, his choice to disinherit. Jade showed me more dignity in 4 days than my family did in 4 years, he said. She is the only one who earned the right to carry forward what I spent a lifetime building. It was devastating in its calm clarity, damning in its detail. That evening, he asked me to wheel him into the living room, where the window overlooked the fading light. There's a bottle of port in my study, he said, behind the economics textbooks. Martha and I saved it for our 50th anniversary. Never made it that far. I found the dusty bottle, poured us each a small glass into crystal tumblers, forgotten in a cabinet. His hand trembled as he raised it. To justice, he said. I lifted mine, to dignity. We sipped slowly, the taste rich and bittersweet. He dozed as I read aloud from his favorite Raymond Chandler novel, the words filling the room like a lullaby. He spoke in fragments of Martha, of his career, of trips he never took. Not once did he mention Elaine or Brady. Close to midnight, his breathing changed. I set the book aside and took his hand. The rise and fall of his chest slowed, softened until it stopped. No last words, no dramatic confession. Just a man slipping quietly into rest, his hand cooling in mine. For a long time I couldn't move. The tears came hard and relentless, not only for him, but for myself, for the years I had wasted on a man like Brady, for the losses that had brought me here, for the strange and profound bond forged in the final days of a stranger's life. At dawn, Diane came to confirm what I already knew. She looked at him peaceful in his chair and said softly, "Many don't go so gently. He looks like he just fell asleep." "He did," I whispered, listening to his favorite book, sipping the wine he'd saved. The men from the funeral home came next, carrying him away with solemn reverence. One of them recognized him from community fundraisers. He was a good man, he said. The house felt unbearably empty after they left. I allowed myself a few moments of unguarded grief, head-bowed tears staining the dark wood of his desk before I began the next phase. Because Brady and Elaine would be home tomorrow. And when they walked through that door expecting to find a dying man, they would instead find every truth laid bare. Monday morning arrived with an eerie calm. I dressed in a simple black dress I had bought the day before, its fabric heavy against my skin, and stood in the center of the silent house. The rooms no longer smelled of neglect and dust. They carried the faint scent of order, of preparation. On the mantel, Victor's cream-colored letter leaned against a framed photo of the family, Brady and Elaine beaming at the camera, while Victor stood just off to the side, his smile faint, almost apologetic. In the dining room, I had arranged folders of evidence in neat stacks, bank statements, canceled appointments, witness testimonies from neighbors. On the television, Victor's video testimony waited on pause, ready to play. And beside my packed suitcase, I left printed screenshots of Brady's vacation photos, their cocktails and grins frozen in time beside the record of Victor's decline. By noon, the sound of car doors slamming broke the silence. Laughter and chatter spilled into the air. Carefree, sunburned voices riding on the glow of the Caribbean. The front door swung open. Brady entered first, his tan deep, his arms full of duty-free shopping bags. Elaine followed close behind, her designer sunglasses perched on her head, her voice already filling the hallway. Melissa trailed with a look of hesitation, and behind her Hannah, the blonde whose laugh had haunted my marriage, hovered like a shadow. "Honey, we're home." Brady called, his tone light until his eyes landed on me, standing in the living room, solemn and still. The bag slid from his hands, thudding against the hardwood. "What's with the funeral getup?" he asked, his voice faltering. Elaine brushed past him, setting her handbag on the console table. "Where's Dad napping?" He never was much of a morning person. Her tone was dismissive, almost bored, as if she were asking about a misplaced pet. I took a steadying breath. Victor passed away Saturday night. The words hit the room like a stone dropped into water. The ripples spread across their faces, Elaine's eyes narrowing, Melissa paling, Brady blinking as if trying to process. Hannah took a step back, her smile faltering. "What do you mean, passed away?" Elaine demanded, her voice sharp. "He died peacefully in his sleep around midnight," I said quietly, my hands clasped in front of me. The funeral was yesterday afternoon. His friends, neighbors, and colleagues came. It was a lovely turnout. Brady's expression hardened, but not with grief, with calculation. "You held a funeral without us, without his family." "His family was invited," I replied, meeting his eyes. "I left message after message telling you his condition was declining. You chose not to answer." Melissa spoke softly, guilt threading her words. "I told you, Brady. I told you he looked bad when we FaceTimed." Brady waved her off, frustration bleeding into his features. "We need to sit down." "Yes," I said, gesturing toward the living room. "We do." They gathered reluctantly, avoiding Victor's rocking chair, which stood empty like an accusation. I picked up the envelope from the coffee table, its weight heavy in my hands. Victor left a letter. His words were meant for you. Elaine crossed her arms, impatience etched into every line of her face. Did he change his will? Is that what this is about? Perhaps you should hear him first. I unfolded the letter and read aloud. Victor's disappointment flowed through my voice. Holidays spent alone, medical appointments canceled, offhand remarks about waiting for him to die. And then the line that silenced even Elaine. "The greatest pain in life is not illness or even death. It is the realization that those you loved saw you only as a burden to be tolerated, not a soul to be cherished." When I finished, the air in the room grew heavy. Elaine's jaw tightened. Brady shifted in his seat. Melissa looked away and Hannah stared at the floor. "He was confused at the end," Brady muttered. "The medication." "Victor was perfectly lucid," I interrupted. "In fact, he recorded a video statement." I pressed play. On the screen, Victor appeared in his bed, his voice calm, his eyes unwavering. He spoke of neglect with chilling precision, dates, incidents, names. He described meals left out of reach, pills halved without consent, overheard words that cut deeper than knives. And then his final words: "Jade showed me more dignity in 4 days than my family did in 4 years. She is the only one who earned the right to inherit what I built." The silence after was suffocating. Elaine's face drained of color. Brady's hands balled into fists. "This is all a setup," Brady snapped, his voice rising. "She manipulated a dying man." The doorbell rang. I opened it to find Patricia standing there, her briefcase in hand, the notary Thomas beside her. "Am I interrupting?" she asked coolly. "Not at all," I said. "The family has just returned." Patricia stepped inside, her heels clicking against the hardwood. "Then it's time for the official notification. As executor of Victor Harmon's estate, I am here to read his final will and testament." Brady straightened in his chair, his confidence flickering back. "Finally. Let's get this over with." Patricia adjusted her glasses and began. "The will is straightforward. Victor Harmon leaves the entirety of his estate to Jade Mitchell with provisions for charitable donations to elder abuse prevention organizations." The words landed like thunder. Elaine shot to her feet. "That's impossible. We're his family." Patricia's tone remained steady. "The will explicitly cites abandonment and neglect as reasons for disinheritance. It was properly witnessed, notarized, and filed. Victor was examined by 2 physicians, both of whom certified his competence." Brady's smugness collapsed into panic. "This is fraud. We'll contest it." "You're welcome to try," Patricia replied, unshaken. "But with the extensive documentation, the video testimony and neighbor statements, you'll only waste money you don't have." Elaine's face twisted. "What do you mean, money we don't have?" Patricia exchanged a look with me before continuing. "The properties you occupy belong to the Harmon Family Trust, now under Jade's control as trustee. The investment accounts you've been drawing from have been frozen pending investigation." Brady's skin turned gray. "No. No, the house is mine. Dad promised." "Victor promised nothing," I cut in. "You assumed." The weight of it hit Melissa next. Her voice cracked. "What about our college funds? Grandpa set them up, didn't he?" Patricia's gaze softened. "Victor provided funds years ago, but those accounts were never created." Melissa's eyes widened. She turned to her brother. You spent our college money. The room erupted. Accusations flew like daggers. Elaine shrieked. Brady cursed. Melissa trembled with betrayal. Hannah slipped quietly toward the door, unwilling to be part of the implosion. Through it all, I stood in the center, calm, steady, the black dress like armor. I had been the discarded one, the abandoned one, but now I was the keeper of truth. The accusations echoed around the living room like shattering glass. Elaine shouted about betrayal. Melissa wept quietly in the corner. Brady's voice thundered with threats that rang hollow the more he realized how little power he had left. I let the chaos swirl for a moment, then turned and walked calmly to the bedroom where my suitcase waited. When I returned, Brady followed me into the hallway, his bravado slipping his face etched with desperation. He reached for me as though I might still be his anchor. "Jade, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "We can work this out." "Hannah was a mistake. I swear it meant nothing. We can start over. We can rebuild." I stared at him. This man I had once loved and saw him clearly for the first time. The boyish charm, the easy smile, the practiced lies, none of it masked the truth anymore. He had taken my father's legacy, my trust, my years, and spent them on another woman, and a vacation while leaving me with his dying stepfather. Behind every sorry and every excuse was a void where real love should have been. Slowly, I slipped the wedding ring from my finger and placed it in his palm. Then I set our apartment keys on top of it. "You left him to die, Brady," I said softly, my voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. "And now you get nothing. Not his estate, not his respect, not me." His eyes widened, panic flashing in them. "You can't just walk away from this. You can't get away with this. I'll fight it in court, Jade. I'll prove you manipulated him." At the doorway, I turned one last time, my hand resting on the handle. Everything was done legally, every paper signed, every word recorded. "You taught me something valuable in our marriage. Brady, always keep receipts." I stepped out into the cold November sunlight. Behind me, his voice rose in desperation threats, tangled with pleas, Elaine's shrill protests piercing the air, Melissa sobbing quietly. But those voices, once so heavy in my life, were already fading, becoming part of a past I had no desire to carry forward. Patricia had arranged a quiet hotel room for me, a place to gather myself before deciding what came next. I placed my suitcase in the trunk and glanced across the street. Mrs. Peterson, the neighbor who had brought casserole and truth in equal measure, stood on her porch. She gave me a small nod and a knowing wave. I lifted my hand in return, a surprising lightness settling in my chest despite the grief still raw in me. Victor's gift wasn't just financial security, though that mattered in ways I couldn't deny. It was clarity. It was the realization that dignity and love are measured not by words, but by actions. He had shown me in his final days that justice could be found even when betrayal tried to bury it. That kindness mattered, even when cruelty tried to erase it. Driving away from that house, I didn't think of Brady or Elaine or even Hannah. They would spend the rest of their lives grappling with what they had lost. The inheritance, the trust, the image they had so carefully constructed, all gone. What haunted them would not be the money, but Victor's voice, steady and disappointed, reminding them of the family they had chosen not to be. I thought instead of Victor, of the way his eyes softened when I sliced peaches for him, of the way his voice strengthened when he dictated his final letter, of the quiet dignity in his last breath as he drifted away, not alone, but with someone holding his hand. For 4 days I had been more than the abandoned wife. I had been a witness, a companion, a bearer of justice, and in return he had given me the strength to leave behind the chains of a loveless marriage and the courage to believe in a life beyond betrayal. Sometimes life doesn't give us the family we expect. Sometimes it hands us strangers who show us more love in a handful of days than blood ever did in years. And sometimes the greatest revenge is not anger, but peace, the peace of walking away with your head high while those who wronged you drown in the weight of their choices. So I leave this story with you the way I once left that house behind me. What you take from it is yours. But I hope it reminds you you are never as powerless as betrayal tries to make you believe. If my story touched you, I ask only this: share it. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that justice comes in many forms, that dignity can be reclaimed, and that even in betrayal there can be new beginnings. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment about the moment that struck your heart the most. Your voices, your reflections mean more than you know.